Well, as the Smiths would say, stop me if you think that you've heard this one before. Yes, I'm invoking the Smiths right off the bat. Here we go. I was thinking about this episode of Seared, Stories from the Stove podcast. My name is Paul Silva. This episode, I was sitting, enjoying my coffee, and thinking, what are we going to, what do I need to share today? And a story came up. And I believe I may have shared it on an earlier episode, but in passing as part of something else, hence the Smiths quote. It had me thinking about this topic on a broader scale. And I think it's important because at the time, I didn't think it would have. Well, you'll get what I'm talking about because it opens things up, especially now that we have social media. That social media has been back in the day when all of this was going. There really wasn't social media, which I always, some days I wish there was, and other days I am so glad there wasn't anything to document my foolishness. But at the same time, part of me is like, oh, it would have been nice to have like some pictures and some, all that from then back in the day to, document growth. Anyway, I was thinking about this story where I worked in one place with, there was this one cook in particular, and she and I got on famously. We were in similar places in our career in terms of where we were at and our skill set and level and all that. And then she went to move to another restaurant, which is cool. Like, cooks move around a lot. I moved around a lot. It's a very transitory type of industry. And she went to this restaurant that was getting a lot of attention. It was like a sort of a fine dining, but very small place because the chef only had one stove and it was in the basement. And not only was it just a stove, it wasn't a commercial stove. It was the stove that like your grandma or your mom would have had, your parents would have had, electric with the coils that took forever to heat up. It was one of those. And that was it. And then he had like a few other, pieces of equipment, I'm sure, no doubt. But that was part of the charm. But apparently it put out amazing food. I never went there, but she went to work there. And she stayed for I don't know how long, but she came back. Now, the issue arose for me when she came back. I was excited at first, but she had changed, which is good. Changes, we need to change. But to me, I felt it as insufferable because everything was, well, at this place we did this, at this place we did this, at this place we did this. That's what I heard. And I was getting annoyed. And I wasn't the only one, but I'm here to talk about me. And like even challenging the chef and questioning him, and I could see he would get frustrated. And part of me was like, well, then why don't you go back there? Like, why did you leave if this place is so horrible? So, I don't know. I may have asked that. I probably did, knowing me. Anyway, it got to a point where at some point she and I were working together, like shoulder to shoulder, like physically on the line. And the two stations, they were separate, but in a way we were kind of partners. We had to work together because one of the big things about the kitchen is communication. It's important that everyone communicates in a timely manner so everything can go out in the right way. And even before, like, what do you got and this, it's very important. And I did not know what to do with all this annoyance and resentment and anger and frustration. So I did something that I really hadn't done before, and I don't really do now, and that was ignore her. What I mean by ignoring, and it's not in the way that, oh, I just ignored the things that she said that annoyed me. No, I completely shunned her. Shut her down. That was my goal. It's like you pissed off a Scorpio. That's what you get. A Scorpio stellium, if you know what that means. If you don't, it's okay. It just means I had a lot of Scorpio in my chart. And, these days I'm more along the lines of my Cancer rising. So you don't have to know astrology. Don't worry. But the point was this. I employed something that is very powerful. And I mean, when I ignored her, I didn't say hello. I didn't say goodbye. Whatever she said to me, I completely ignored. I did not answer one question. I said zero to her, even on the line. Maybe I pointed at something I mean, it was awful. I mean, I can't imagine how it was for her. For me, it was hard because I'm such a easygoing kind of person. So to push me into that corner, it was rough. And to the point, actually, she quit a week later. I can't say that was because of me, but no doubt, I'm sure it played a part. Again, I don't know. This is not about me being the center of attention here. I laugh because here I am with a microphone talking to nobody in particular. Yeah, no center of attention at all, right, Polly? Right. Anyway, just being goofy. I need more coffee. That's what I need. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Not coffee, although that is a very important topic. Ignoring, shunning, shutting down, ghosting, whatever you want to call it. It is very powerful. And so what I want to share with you on this podcast is kind of like, the ways that we ignore people, why it hurts, why it's a form of punishment in so many ways, and like how it shows up in modern day. I also want to share maybe some reasons why people ignore others and how to cope if you're the one being ignored, how to cope with that. So I'm going to drop some good info on you. I'm not going to go too textbook on you because I know it can be dry. It can be dry, and I don't want this to be dry. We want to be more like brisket. You know what I'm saying? We want that, steamed veggie kind of lovely appeal, that moisture content that's really going to enliven things. So, okay, let me take a quick break, clear my throat. You didn't need to hear that, and then we'll jump right into it. Have you ever so aggressively tried to clear your throat that it turned into hiccups? That's what's been happening to me today. It's so annoying. And I've been drinking water, and I've just had this funny little frog in my throat, as Belle and Sebastian would sing. It's frustrating. Anyway, let's march on, shall we? Let's continue with service here. So I was talking about how I ignored this poor woman. I really should make amends to her. But I mean, that is a very in-your-face way. I ignored her completely. It was the silent treatment, essentially, right? It's this deliberate refusal to communicate with someone. And it's a way of punishment or control. And that's what I was seeking, punishment. I was punishing her for the way that I perceived her. And that was probably, no doubt, incredibly hurtful and isolating. That's one of the ways that we can ignore people. The other one is, I mentioned, ghosting. And that happens, that's more now of a social media kind of thing, where you just abruptly cut off all communication without explanation. And that can leave the person feeling like confused, hurt, abandoned, even rejected. And a lot of this, well, I'll get to that in a second, but we don't know what we're triggering in others. Now, of course, everyone's triggers are their responsibility. That's clear. I will always stand by that. But our actions are triggered by something within us. Another way that we ignore people can be more subtle. Those are pretty harsh ways of doing it. But it could be things like avoiding eye contact with someone or changing the subject abruptly when they try to talk. It could be just not responding to their texts or calls. Like, you're still communicating with them, but you purposely shut that part down, maybe. Excluding people from social gatherings, making dismissive comments, mean girls. Like, you could sometimes it's that mean girls approach and attitude, and we can I mean, ignoring people is one of many ways we can make people feel small or attempt to. But ignoring is just it's more pervasive. It's to me it's deadlier because it's intentional. Like the intention is really to be hurtful and to harm. And the reasons why that can feel like that is like the big one could be like emotional trauma, right? Again, you don't know what people have gone through. We can't, it's not like, we don't get a memo ahead of time. There's nothing on their forehead that says warning, trigger warnings, blah, blah, blah. But there are a lot of people out there with big wounds. And for many, when you feel ignored, it can trigger rejection, abandonment, worthlessness, shame, anger, sadness. Those are big feelings, right? Like those are big feelings. And especially if they're tied into some sort of abuse or trauma from the past, it can be even more overwhelming. And so that, first and foremost, that is the big one. Now, you don't have to have had that to still feel hurt, right? Like if you're ignored, you're going to feel isolated and alone. And that can lead to the feeling of loneliness. Now, alone and lonely are two different things, but being alone for a while can, for some people, lead to the feeling of loneliness or even depression. Also, we may feel a loss of self-esteem, right? Like if someone's ignoring me, I'm going to go like, not only like, what did I do? But like, maybe I'm not worthy of being spoken to. Maybe I'm not worthy of being like attended to or acknowledged. And that can erode my self-esteem and self-confidence. Rejection, I mentioned that earlier, that again, that rejection, abandonment, it can feel like you're getting re-hurt, re-wounded by that rejection. And they may not even intend to be ignoring you. And I know for myself, and this is another story that I shared, is one of my chefs called me down to speak to me. And I shared this not too long ago. And he was on the phone. I said, okay. And I kind of motioned like, okay, I'll come back. He said, no, like sit. And I sat there for like 20 minutes, just sitting there. And he was just on the phone like I wasn't there. Like I was being ignored. I don't know if that was punishment. I don't know if that was control. It feels like it was a bit of both. And I felt helpless. I felt stupid. I felt, my loss of self-esteem. I felt, like I was, the dunce cap on in the corner. And so that's how I felt. So even though we're in the same room, he was talking to someone else and I was being ignored, even though I tried to say, hey, do you mind? I can come back when you're not busy. So to me, it was intentional. I could be wrong. And also, like when you're ignored, it can also trigger a fear, like a mistrust, right? Because if you're hurt, you're not going to want to get hurt again. So you may just be like, maybe I'm the one that's going to ignore people because I don't want to get hurt. And, one of the things that, and I was just thinking about this too, is how in the past, back in the day, right? Like historically, being ostracized. I remember reading how one of the harshest punishments a tribe or group can have is in ostracizing a member. And at the time, my introverted self said, actually, I kind of like that. Why? Well, that doesn't sound so bad. So you just don't have to talk to anyone. Cool. But I realized many years later, it's deadly. It's like you literally can die. Back in the day, everyone relied on one another. Like that was a death sentence, like in the physical, real world. But it's powerful because it's also social control, right? It's a way to enforce conformity or a way to punish people. It's kind of like, people would have, people's heads on a stake at the front, like as a warning. In a way, being ostracized was a way to warn others, like, hey, shape up or ship out. And you would see that like in some Amish communities, I believe, some religious groups, like, especially more culty kind of things, or even certain sects of Christianity. They would historically punish members by shunning. And like I said, it could lead to literal death. And even if it's not literal death, like if it's something today, it can still feel like that because of the isolation and loneliness, right? Because like now, let's say you see that in cyberbullying and all that kind of stuff, or just in social media, you can feel like you're getting cut off from your social network or maybe your support system. There's shame, humiliation, depression, anxiety, loss of identity. That's a big one, because who am I without being part of this group? And for, and this is why, like for teenagers, right? Teens are all about conforming. They're stepping away from the identity of their parents, but they also want to conform. And I mean, I'm laughing to myself inside because I think of, the the broccoli haircuts the boys have, those with the broccoli boy. My oldest has that. And I just see droves of them, little packs of these broccoli heads. And I always think, like, that's just, imagine being shunned from that. Imagine, because you're doing all the things to fill in, to be part of the group. And imagine being shunned from that. I mean, I was bullied big time in high school, and I was shunned. I had only a few, other ne'er-do-wells that were also shunned, so we had no choice to hang out together. And it wasn't healthy. Like that to this day still affects me. So it does have long-term effects. And so, we don't have those tribes anymore per se, but definitely there's the social exclusion, there's the cyberbullying, like I mentioned. And yeah, definitely the ignoring or avoiding someone, like in a workplace. Totally, completely. I'm sure it's still done. Absolutely. I can guarantee that it's still being done. And so why do we do it? I mentioned control and punishment, but is there anything else that might be going under there? If we lift the hood by the person, the ignorer rather than the ignoree, what's happening there? I know for me, there was resentment. There was annoyance. But for others, it could be disappointment. Like, I can't even, that whole expression, I can't even. So there's maybe someone that's just disappointed us so many times, we just don't bother. We don't bother. Or maybe for some, it's fear of conflict. So in this case with me and this cook, like, instead of like just letting her know how I felt, my fear of conflict also kicked in amongst those other things, and I just didn't want to get into it. Another reason why, I'm just thinking here, need for space. Sometimes it's not about being vindictive or anything. Sometimes it's literally, I just need space. I just, maybe there's someone at work or someone in your social media. It's just, you need a break. You need a break from. So you just ignore them for a little bit. I need a break. That's what your head, your psyche is screaming. And that could be it. Maybe communication issues, misunderstandings, or different communication styles. And that can lead to a pulling apart. And especially if you have a hard time saying what's on your mind, like I did, it was easier just not to say anything, period. And there's other things too. I'm sure, like, there could be mental health issues, but I'm not going to speak to that. That's outside the scope of this little podcasty. It could be personal problems, stress, all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, ignoring it's not a healthy way. That goes without saying. I mean, you're smart. You listen to this podcast. You're a bright person. That thing with a little self-aggrandizing comment. But it's not a healthy way to deal with conflict or difficult emotions. It may feel good in the moment, but believe me, like, for me doing that for a week, that was hard on me because it was so counter to who I was and still am in many ways. So what do you do? What do you do if you're being ignored? What if you're being, I was going to say ghosted. We could get into that. Cyberbullying, that's a different flavor. But I'm just going to share a few things on how to cope with being ignored, because it can hurt big time. Okay, let's take a quick break. Okay, during the quick break, I banged my foot so hard. I'm still in pain, but I'm also laughing because I don't know if you've ever seen that clip from Family Guy with Peter Griffin. He bangs his, I think he bangs his knee or his shin, and all he does is going ah, ah, and it's like the first. Okay, it's kind of funny, but it goes on forever, and that becomes the joke itself. It's like I don't know how long, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, which is like forever. Anyway, anytime I bang myself, I think of that. Anyway, I'm not ignoring you. I'm not ignoring the topic of being ignored. So we've been talking about, how it feels like, and I shared, what it was like for me as both the ignorer and the ignoree. And there's lots going on both sides. Like it doesn't happen just for nothing. And I just wanted to share like what you can do if you feel like you've been ignored. And it happens. It happens sometimes it's someone forgets an appointment, and that can feel like I'm being ignored or I haven't been seen. Or it could be someone skips you in line by accident at the store, or it could be whatever it is. We can all feel that in different ways. And what I would suggest when you feel like that, and just like any other sort of internal work, is to first and foremost acknowledge your feelings. Like, understand it's okay to feel hurt, angry, or sad. That's okay. Like, acknowledging your feelings is the first step in any sort of healing or deep work process. Like, it's okay to not be okay. And to practice self-compassion, like be okay with that. Like, yeah, I am pissed off. I am hurt. And just acknowledge it. So just like, that's the first step. Like, it makes sense that I'm upset because X, Y, and Z. Without that, you can't get to any next steps. So there's that. The second thing I would say, and this is where I jump to all the time with anything, is try to understand the situation from the other person's perspective. This is a hard one for a lot of people because they jump right into ego and pride. They jump to conclusions. They assume the worst. They immediately start calling that other person all sorts of names. But this is important. What could be happening for that person in that moment as well? And I mentioned it earlier. There could be something like someone's stressed. Maybe there's financial issues. Maybe they had an argument with their spouse or partner earlier. Maybe they just had a really shitty day. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe a loved one is sick. Maybe a friend is missing. I don't know. It doesn't have to be huge, but it's always considering like what is going on with this other person, because we don't know. They're not going to tell us. Especially if it's a stranger or someone maybe just like an acquaintance. So there's that part. And just also accepting, like, we talk about this all the time. You can't control other people. So how they're coming across, and yeah, they may be a jackass on top of that. They could be. Like both, but it's okay to feel the feelings. Like both can be happening at the same time. Like you can feel like you've been rejected or hurt, but you also understand that they had a bad day. Both can be correct and true. And then the other thing that I would step into is, where are your boundaries now around this? Like, is this a one-time thing? They just had a bad day, they ignored you, and then, maybe you share something. Hey, I feel like you're ignoring me or something. Depending on your relationship, depending on how how you are. But if this is someone that's persistently and continually ignoring you, then maybe just limit your interactions with them. And not to allow yourself to stay small, like not to sacrifice your own happiness for someone who maybe doesn't value you, right? Like if you get ghosted, you've been on a date or two and that person, you think everything's going really well, and they ghost you and they cut you off and they block you and all that stuff. I guarantee it's not about you. I can guarantee it's not about you. But sometimes we take that hurt and instead of practicing self-compassion, we compound that and we hurt ourselves more by saying, yeah, maybe I'm ugly, maybe I'm stupid, maybe I'm not fun, whatever you would say to yourself. I'm not saying that to you, by the way. I think you're lovely. Um, so prioritize your well-being around this. It's not easy, but or else you get caught up in it. And then what I would also say is switch to the people that do bring joy to your life. Like invest in the positive relationships. Like spend the time with people who appreciate and value you. And focus on that rather than the people who are, because there's some people, again, they don't know how to, this happens a lot with ghosting, right? They don't have the social skills, or they don't understand, or they struggle themselves with certain things, and they don't know how to end things. They don't know how to close things off. They don't know how to say the things. And so they may just pull back, and that's all they know. And I can do that too. I can still do that in some ways. Absolutely. Like I just don't know, or I'm afraid of getting into conflict or getting into a difficult discussion. As much as I talk about them, actually on the last episode, I talked about having difficult discussions. Doesn't mean all of mine are perfect. Sometimes I try to duck under the radar because I'm human and I do things. And then, after all of that, my friend, if you just take care of yourself, like do the things you enjoy, move your body, like, mindfulness, meditation, all the stuff you always hear about, because again, you can't control other people, but you can control your response to it. And so if, let's say, my wife is having a bad day, and she's usually pretty good at regulating herself, but let's say someone else I know is having a bad day, and if I feel like I'm taking it on, then I do energetic boundaries. I clear, I ground myself, I move my body, take myself to a coffee shop, whatever it is I enjoy, play a video game. And I just realized that's them, that's not me. And I'm not going to allow them to affect me. So at the end of the day, ignoring, shunning, ghosting, bullying, whatever you want to call it, it can make a big impact. Not only on you as the ignorer, but you, if you're the ignoree, both parties, there's something that's not quite connecting. And that's okay. Again, we're human, but we can learn and we can shift and we can trust ourselves that we're not bad people. We're just making certain decisions or maybe responding to something in a way that's not in our best interest. So with that, what I do want to share with you, please don't ignore me by turning this off right now, is I've got some really cool things going on. You're going to notice my social media is going to shift. I'm shifting into a different space. And I don't know if I mentioned in the last episode, but if you're on my email list, you are going to, I've shared some of it already on my email list, my email community. And today, this being Wednesday, I'm going to be sending out an email explaining even more. And there's some actual details about what I'm doing. And that is stepping into the spiritual work, doing readings. I'm also, my goal is also to work with men in the spiritual space and learning to grow their spiritual world. Also, a combination of spiritual work, coaching, but really helping men step into and claiming that spiritual space that we all have. And what I have always found is that it's easier for women to step into this. This is general, but this is my experience. And men do want to expand and open up their spiritual life and practices and connections, but they don't, like very many men, we get into the lone wolf mentality. And so my goal, my aim is to work with men. I'll work with everyone, but definitely I'll be looking towards men as well and really try to get them to open up in that space. So you're going to see more of that. If you're not on my email list, there'll be a link in the description and you'll just see my social change. Even like You Are Gumbo will probably change. But Seared will stay here. Seared is not going anywhere. I still love doing this. This may be the final season. I don't know. But for now, I'm jazzed up. I love doing this. It makes me happy, brings me joy, and I hope it's been useful to you. So check out all the links in the description. There's going to be more coming. Join the email list. It's growing every day. And it's not like me just selling stuff or anything. It's not like that. I do share stories, or, I do share a bit of myself and what's going on, and kind of my goofy self and serious self and all that. I bring it all, man. I bring it all to the table. So with that, please like, subscribe, share, all the good stuff. And kitchen's closed, man. Kitchen is closed. Now scram.